Okay.
Yep, it's
Yes, it's
live.
Yeah.
live, and then
No, yeah, it's live. Go into like all of our different pages, and then we'll put it up on the
Okay. So
Facebook.
you don't edit it afterwards.
Yeah, we'll he'll probably edit in music, but then we'll have it up on our podcast platforms, and Jay will make sure that you get the
Okay,
links
great.
for everything as well.
I got. I'm wearing my Allsopp shirt.
And let's try this again. How about now? If there are sound now, let me know, and we'll try this again. Like I said, I'm driving the driver's seat tonight, and I had a really great speech going. Really great speech going. I was on a roll there for a minute. All right. Anyways, like I was saying, it's showing that I have sound on my end now. Hopefully it's fixed. Welcome back to Hops News. We got a wicked good episode for you guys tonight. And if you like us, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple, Spotify, all that kind of stuff is where we are at. I haven't been told that they can't hear us at all yet, so we'll go ahead there. I am Matt. Alongside me, obviously, is Lauren. And then we have a really great guest, Jamie, one of the refounders of Allsopp, and I hope I said that right. I'm sorry, I'm so uncultured. But yeah, I'm drinking one of those fine beers that you're going to see. We're going to talk about in just a minute. They're India Pale Ale. This has made its way across the pond, and I got a couple of these beers, so I'm really excited to dive into this one. You can go ahead and take a look. Nice, good, clean color. There is no sound still. Why is there no sound? This is awkward. Well, technical difficulties, folks, because the
I
sound
can
was
hear
there.
you.
I know we can hear each other. Let's find out why, shall we? Because I'm showing that I have sound on my end. And now we're frozen. Man, you see what happens? You think you know how to do something. Oh boy.
At least we got beer.
No, there I hear it now. I was hearing it on our live feed. Weird. All right, well, we're rolling with it because I can hear it. And regardless, if we get sound back, then great. Go ahead and restart your stream. I can hear it. And 3, 2, 1, let's go. Party time. We got sound again. I sincerely apologize. Jamie, let's we'll get to you in just a second. Lauren, what are you drinking over there so that we can get this awkward embarrassment of my end out of the way?
All right. No, I was muted for because I was checking on all the platforms. It appears to be where it sounds good on YouTube. I am drinking the Allsopp's Pale Ale. So I actually cracked open the IPA yesterday because I didn't think I'd be able to drink both of these within the hour. But it's really good. It's great. I love when I get to drink any, kind of German or English type of beer because as much as I love my, New England hazies and my stouts, barrel aged and everything, sometimes it's nice to have just a good classic style of beer. And that's why we all love Oktoberfest season too, because a lot of Americans who are into craft beer don't drink those classic styles as much
Hmm.
as we honestly want to. So, I mean, it's great. I love it. I loved the IPA last night and I'm loving the pale ale and I love my hops. So IPAs are my favorite. So it's that helps too.
Very
But that's
true.
what I'm drinking.
Very true. You are all about your hops. And our guest, our special guest, who is it's the poor guy. It's middle of the night over there. Jamie, welcome. First time on the show. Welcome. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and then let everybody know what role it is you play behind this amazing beer.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you both for having me on the show. Um, it's not too bad. It's 1 a.m. and it's a good time to be having an Allsopp's beer, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for allowing me to do that tonight. So yeah, I'm a member of the Allsopp's family and refounded the brewery. We relaunched it this year. It's taken 3 years of finding recipes, finding the old recipe books, getting the trademarks in one place, testing the beer, redesigning a 300-year-old brand, putting it all together over lockdown in remote circumstances. So doing lots of Zoom tastings like we're kind of doing now. But we relaunched 3 months ago through various pubs in the UK and on our website. And we have been as faithful as we can be to the original recipes, the original design, and released the India Pale Ale and the Pale Ale. The Pale Ale, which was our original first beer, sort of the beer that made the Allsopp name, and the India Pale Ale, which is interesting in terms of the date and the history of it as we go into next year, that it's a significant date for the India Pale Ale. And the India Pale Ale is the beer that we sort of claim to have been the original Burton India Pale Ale. And the man that created that beer was Samuel Allsopp, who was my 7 times grandfather.
Ooh, 7. I was off just a little bit. I was like earlier. I was like,
Yeah.
it's his. I said it 4 times. I was just off just a little bit. Because this brewery originally, I was reading through the website and the history of you guys. I was blown away. 1750 is kind of like where your origins start, correct?
Well, the date is shrouded in a little bit of mystery as we go into it. You'll sort of find kind of typical Allsopps. It's the date on the memorabilia, the mirrors, and the sort of old brewing jugs that I've been brought up in, that was in my sort of family home. The date is 1730, so it's established 1730, and that's the date that everyone thinks Allsopps began. We can't find any real evidence of that date, apart from the fact that my 9 times grandfather, a guy called Benjamin Wilson, was probably brewing in Burton as one of 3 major brewers, post the monks that started brewing in Burton in about 1295.
Wow.
But the brewery title deeds were transferred to his name in 1742. So being a stickler for dates, it would actually be 1742, but Allsopp's claims as an old brewery, it claims the date 1730. So that's what we say, we're established 1730.
Wow. That's
Now, I know you
Oh, go ahead,
Burton,
Lauren.
though, is important. I feel like living in the States, a lot of people probably aren't familiar as to why that might be important to a beer person. But from what because I read, once I started reading your website, I couldn't stop. I loved all the education and the history and everything. And then I was even looked it up in one of my beer encyclopedias, and it was talking about that water there is very special because of the geology or something. And you add the gypsum or something. Can you explain that to our brewers or to our viewers and
Yeah,
how you guys were like the brewing capital of the world at one point, weren't you?
Burton-on-Trent was the brewing capital of the world. It
Okay.
was in the time of Benjamin Wilson Senior and Salt, and the original sort of brewers. It was a small town that was completely dominated by brewing. It sits on the Trent River, and the Trent River goes into the Humber, one of the tributaries of the Humber, which is a great sort of industrial river of the north. The Trent at Burton is pretty much bang in the center of the country. And what is so special about the Trent at Burton is that it sits on these gypsum beds, and the gypsum is very high in minerals. So the minerality of the water in magnesium, calcium, and sulfur. And you would have been able to taste, interestingly, that old sulfur. They call it the Burton Snatch. That's sort of like, the first drink of an old Burton ale really was sulfurous. So, but what happened and what they didn't realize in those days was that when you brewed with this, it made a very, very bright beer. So during the time in the 1800s, and prior to that, my family's exported beer to the Baltic states, and we can go back to that. But it really became significant when he added a great deal more hops than had ever been added before in a beer, and up the alcohol content for the first India Pale Ale. And that water
Crazy.
brightened the beer and added a preservative nature to it that allowed it to go on that 6-month journey around the bottom of Africa into East India. And the beer arrived. Well, when the beer left, my great grandfather would have thought it was, and his brewer, Job Goodhead, thought that it was a very, very bitter beer. But the combination of the water, the 6-month journey, the shuddering of the boat on the water, the fluctuations in temperature, mellowed this beer out. So when it got to what is the ports of East India, and was unloaded and drank, it was a surprise to everyone. And it was this delicious, bright, hoppy beer that was quite well balanced with the sort of traditional malts, quite high ABV. But it had improved on this journey rather than deteriorated, which most beers deteriorate. So that was the birth of India Pale Ale, as we know.
That
Yeah.
is so cool to me.
I know.
This magnificent journey. And as I was reading it, it's like the beer was going to the Baltics, and then I was reading even more, and it's like your beer was a part of like these Arctic explorations and stuff. And I'm just like, I'm sitting there, and as I kept reading, I was just like, my mind just continued to be like, oh my God, what has happened? Like,
Yeah.
to think, because to most of us, to us Americans per se, like the beer scene is something that's kind of exploded in the last 10 to 15 years. But in Europe, we often forget how much history there is and how things go way back, and then you don't even think about how, yeah, well, it makes sense on ships. Like if there was beer, they were going to bring beer because what else are they going to be doing while they're sailing around, right?
Yeah.
Well, if we didn't have
Well,
prohibition, that's what really
Yeah, that too.
messed us up.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned those two other beers. So the first drink was the Pale Ale, which Benjamin Wilson Senior, Benjamin Wilson Junior, and James Allsopp, who was Samuel's father, they brewed a very, very strong, dark, sweet, viscous beer. And you can imagine, the cold north of Europe, that Burton would have been cold, but the Baltic states and Russia, really, really cold. So this beer was like a winter warmer, and
Mm.
it was described as being so viscous and sweet that if you spilt any out of your glass, it was difficult to lift the glass back off the table. And this beer was sent through sort of across the canals, which was quite perilous in those days. You had lots of bandits. It was sent up via canals to the great ports in the east, like Hull, and was sent up into Hamburg, and then into the court of Tsar Peter and Catherine the Great. And the rumor is that they loved this sort of burst. They loved Allsopp's beer for its strong kind of winter. It was really, really strong. So they used to have it at their banquets. And, that's a sort of great sort of accolade to have been liked by Peter and Catherine, the beer. And interestingly, so this beer, I think that the Arctic Ale, which is our CERN, we're sort of racing through the various categories of beers that all sorts of brew. The Arctic Ale went up on these Arctic expeditions with in 1845 up to 1875 to try and open up the Northwest Passage. The Admiralty and Queen Victoria mandated Allsopp's to brew a very, very strong beer. There was sort of probably between 11 and 14% that when it froze, it thawed well, so it didn't deteriorate under these really, really cold conditions and would be difficult in itself. Another byproduct of this beer was it stopped the sailors getting scurvy. So it went on all these great boats with, and they had obviously rum, but they also had Allsopp's Ale, which kept the sailors happy, kept them from getting scurvy, and were taken on these great pioneering sort of explorations. And it is mentioned in these series, the BBC, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, have just made this series. Well, they made it a few years ago. This series called The Terror, which is about the HMS Terror and HMS Cerberus, who got stuck in the ice, and they mentioned rum for the officers and Allsopp's for the sailors.
Oh, that's
See, next time I
awesome.
go to my doctor, I'm gonna be like, see, beer is healthy. They used to give this to sailors to prevent scurvy and things like that. All right, beer is
So
absolutely
you can
healthy.
eat an orange.
I can eat an orange, or I can drink a nice beer and get warmed up a little bit. Okay.
Our old adverts were all about the health effects of Allsopp's beer. And one of the poems that they used to write that was written was, what is it that oh healthy man whose face is so red. Oh, sorry, I'll start again. A healthy man whose face is so red. Oh gosh, I can't remember. It's live. It's too late.
Listen, to be fair, it is also late at night.
I'll have another drink.
Yeah.
I know we're kind of going through the history and the like. So not only did it make its way out to Russia and things, but I was reading that Napoleon himself also impacted the brewery at one point by not allowing any exports or things of that nature.
In 1807, when Napoleon blockaded the British trade routes into Europe, it was at the time that Samuel Allsopp was in Burton Brewing. His brother Thomas was in Hamburg, trying to further the company's trade into the Baltic states. And Napoleon, and the largest army the world has ever seen, sort of blockaded that business in 1807 or 1808. And Allsopp's trade completely died. It was we went into the doldrums. It was a very bad time. Samuel had just bought it off the Wilsons, changed the name to Allsopp and Wilson, but the sales collapsed, and Samuel started brewing regional beers. He brewed a porter and a few other beers, but Napoleon effectively stopped that, and it took from 1808 to 1807 to 1822 for Allsopp's to come up with this new beer. So the India Pale Ale was born out of a necessity to find other sales channels for Allsopp's. And funny enough, another lovely historical moment was when Napoleon blockaded Europe. Thomas Allsopp was in Hamburg, and he had to run, but he was chased out of the city by French militias and had to race back to the UK in fear of his life. And on his way back, he bumped into a Prussian who was fighting Napoleon, called Field Marshal Blucher. And Field Marshal Blucher said, Allsopp's un bon bière, and he said it was his favorite beer. And interestingly, Field Marshal Blucher was then the Prussian general that saved the Duke of Wellington at the Battle of Waterloo. So it's just sort of entwined, the strings of entwined in really interesting history of the country.
So, before we kind of dive into some more, is this all stuff that you're told growing up, being like, yeah, your family history, this is where you come from, this is your line of work, this is what everyone's done? Is this all family tales that you're told, or is it stuff you had to seek out?
Things like that was buried deep in sort of an old book, fun enough. But when I was brought up, it was very much, there was we knew of this wonderful old sort of bit of a mysterious brewery that we were once this brewing family that made really, really good beers, and everyone liked beer in my family, but we were kicked out of the family in 1911 through terrible mismanagement of the business, and we were unceremoniously booted out. And the company merged with Einkoop in 1934, and then the name was dropped in the 50s. So my grandfather can remember the brewery. My father has got first knowledge of my grandfather, and they had quite a lot of beer in the cellars actually that they used to drink. A lot of Allsopp's ale. All of that had gone by the time I was born. We had lost through fire, floods, sort of mismanagement, the records. I had no knowledge of what the ingredients were. So by the time I was told about it, everything had been dispersed all around the place. We didn't have any real records. The companies that had owned it in the meantime had sort of, beaten up the buildings, scattered everything. So it was all a bit mysterious and really, really interesting to research and to speak to beer historians who were very, very helpful. In fact, everyone's been incredibly
Oh,
helpful to
wow.
me on this journey. It's been a really nice experience. The industry here is, as I'm sure in America, is very welcoming and collaborative. So
Mhm.
it's
Oh yeah.
it's been a joy.
So, what brought you back into opening this up and diving into this? What was kind of like, hey, you know what? I want to get this going back again, because it was like the 1950s when it kind of all went away and it would just, went to sleep, like you had said earlier, for 60 years or so.
I I've been thinking about it for, I wrote to Carlsberg when I was a kid and they sent me some Allsopp's beer mats, but I used to do a bit of work in Africa, and there's still an Allsopp's brewery in Nairobi. There was growing up, there was Allsopp's beer was still sold under export in Italy, strangely.
Huh.
And so we had always just had it in the back of our mind, and I'd always wanted to do it. And I had a career doing something completely different. And one day I've been thinking about, I just started to think about it too much. And when that happens, I made the decision it felt right to do it. I gave up my previous job and did a few brewing courses over lockdown. Started ringing up the beer historians, trying to gather all the information I could. And that was in the beginning of 2000. I was stuck in the countryside and kicked it off sort of accumulating all the necessarily aspects in order to make it as an authentic relaunch as we possibly could. It was incredibly important to me to get a Burton brewer. So the brewer that I've got is Jim Appleby, who has worked on Worthington White Shield, who's who knows the traditional Burton brewing techniques and styles very well. And so what happened was the most significant part of this was the day that we found the old ledger, because there
Mhm.
was no recipe books in the old archives in Burton or National Brewery Archives. There's a big blue box which says, Allsopp's ledger, and we looked into, well, the brewing historian Pete Brown, who's on board with Allsopp's and helping me enormously, went to go and find the recipe books, and there was this great big blue box, and at the end of at the bottom of the box it says, "Dear sir, sorry, I've borrowed the Allsopp's recipe books. If you'd like them, please write to me at this address. Yours, Professor Dixon, for example, 1954." And I was like, oh dear. So he wrote to the address, no one was there, they had to change house, and we don't have any recipe books. There were no recipes anywhere. So it took about a year of ringing around so desperately. And we found the old ledger, which is this beautiful red leather bound book with these 250 handwritten recipes in it. And it was in a pub in Liverpool. The collector had it. And so I drove up there really, really
Wow.
quickly and asked him if I could please borrow the old recipes, if he wouldn't mind. Drove back, scanned them all, sent them to him, who then is redesigning them all. So the first ones we got were the using the heritage malt that we used in the originals. We're using this the same, partially similar, partly the same hops, with a bit of difference because the hops are now completely different in their characteristics and the amount of sort of proteins and amino acids they've got. It's
Hmm.
14 times higher, I hear now. So
Hmm.
we had to sort of rejig recipes, but I was very, very keen to make sure that it was as close to the original as possible.
This sounds like a movie almost. This is something that you see in a movie, and it's just that it's crazy to me. Honestly, it's so
I've always
wild.
thought it's so odd, but that's just, this is my bit of the story, which is sort of post the. But I always think that the story arc of the original company would make an amazing story. It's got so much
Hmm.
tension and disaster. It's got like we've got glorious successes and spectacular failures again and again and again. We kind of like all sorts. We kind of blow it up quite often and sort of pick it up and try and make it
Born
work
from the
again. I mean, like,
ashes.
yeah, it's
Well,
there's so many bumps in the road. And, for example, when I opened up sales on the internet for the first time, I was thinking, wow, my ancestors had this company for 200 years, then it was merged with Eindhoven, became one of the biggest breweries in the world with them for about 50 years, and then went to the doldrums. And I was thinking, I pressed the button, I got up early that morning when the sales went live, and all of a sudden the sales going like this. I was like, oh my God. And I was looking at it. And then I got a few emails, and from really nice customers, they're going, are you really selling this beer at a 95% discount? I was like, what?
oh no.
And we'd left a little bit of coding uh, in the website on the sales channel page that we were just testing, but we left it in. So I almost had the brewery for about half an hour before I lost it again.
Oh my god. Oh man.
Well, someone just
So
commented, Robbie said, "This is the stuff Forrest Gump of beers, just casually wandering through history."
yeah, it's true.
It really is. Lauren, I know you've got a ton of questions as well, so please, by all means, fire away.
Well, you've covered a few of them, because yeah, we were both blown away by the history. Well, I thought it was interesting too when I read, so the Arctic expedition, you guys were able, so what was it? Queen Victoria basically put out a bid and was like, all you breweries, you need to come up with a beer to send with them, and you guys won because you had a chemist on in house that was able to actually figure out the science behind it. And I always find that so interesting too. It's like with Carlsberg, they had an in-house scientist, and like how much these scientists have improved beer over the last few centuries, if not longer. So that was amazing. um
Well,
and I
yeah,
had some questions. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. So
No, go ahead.
on the scientist, it's interesting. We I think we claimed to have uh, the first beer scientist. We actually employed a German scientist, Mr. Bottinger, and in 1845, um, Samuel built him this really nice laboratory, and I think he worked out that it was the quality of the water that was giving this sort of unusual quality to the beer that they weren't getting in the London breweries. It's a soft water. But this scientist, was quite a character, and his real passion wasn't beer; it was explosives and researching explosives. And one morning he was playing around in the brewery, and there was this really loud bang, and he was seen sort of a bit startled and sort of like charred white coat. I imagine it was a charred white coat, but I don't know if that what it was really. And he was staggering out of the brewery, and one of the other employees says, Professor, what are you doing? And he says, I'm going out for lunch. And he's like, Sir, why are you going out for lunch? He says, I've done enough for this morning. And inside his laboratory, there was sort of smashed glass everywhere, and he'd had an explosive experiment go wrong that morning. So that's a little side note about crazy, crazy
That's
goings on.
awesome.
I
So the German lager, like, obviously the German lager started to take off in the States in the 1800s, and then World War One and Prohibition kind of took that away from us, the good old German lager. But you guys tried to replicate that, and somehow it backfired, and now you're bringing it back, though. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
It did in 1880. My ancestor Percy Allsopp traveled around Germany to learn the sort of noble art of lagering. He when he thought he understood the process of lagering, because obviously it's completely different to ale brewing, and we weren't doing it. There was the Wrexham brewery in Wales, and there was a brewery in Scotland, but there was no breweries in England, I don't think, at that point. He then took the boat to New York to get a really, really smart. So he, in 1880s, he came to New York and he got a really, really large, like the largest lagering brewery that promised to cut the lagering period down to 3 weeks from 3 months. I don't know how long it was in those days. The traditional lagering period, 2 months, whatever it was. And he brought back this sort of really shiny brewery, closed down the old brewery. We're part of the old brewery. There was 2 breweries at that time, and he put this really amazing lager brewery into it. And it was the biggest lager brewery in the UK. It was the first, probably in England, or maybe the second, but definitely the most significant. And it was the consensus, the UK consensus in 1936. It was still 40% of the capacity of lager demand in the UK. So he really, really went for it. And he was known as this visionary. He bought seaside resorts to sell the lager into. He wanted to export a lot of this lager. And the problem was, though, in the UK in 1889, when he went live, or 1888, no one drank lager. There was no domestic sales for this lager. And he bought a huge pub estate, so he said that his vision far exceeded his business acumen. And Percy is this character that has been quite sort of maligned by my family, and that he kind of blew up the brewery for the final time. But the more I read about him, the more I'd like to have a drink with him, more than anything, because he was such an interesting bloke. I mean, he dressed very flamboyantly. He thought lager was the future. He was right. He was just 50 years early.
Yeah.
So that lager brewery then went up to in 1913, when the family were kicked out. This great businessman, Scottish businessman, great brewer called John Calder, took over and took the lager brewery up to Scotland, to a lower, where it became Graham's Golden Lager, which then became the world famous Skull. Oh. So from that original Skull, which not particularly proud of, because I don't think Skull's a particularly good beer, but you can trace Allsopp's lager into Skull, which is quite interesting.
Just the amount of how everything's so intertwined, it all goes back. Like, that is what a lot of people, they just drink beer, right? We're just, hey man, we're going out to have a good pint of beer. But to me, it's that scientific, that historical aspect that goes back hundreds of years behind beer that really is the interesting thing to really, we're drinking this beer, but the stuff that went behind it that we're talking about now, to me, is fascinating. And a lot of people don't really realize it.
We should mention real quick, if you're paying attention, there will be a question at the end with a giveaway. If you want some Allsopp's beer, you better be paying attention. You can comment on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook.
We do have some extras that we are willing to part ways with, but you got to be paying attention, of course, obviously. And Lauren or Jay will text us the question, and we'll go from there. But that'll be at the end.
I get to come up with it.
Oh, you get to come up with the question. Oh,
yes, he told me to come up with it.
Well,
so I'm paying attention. But no, I found the lager thing really interesting, because when I did a couple segments of like beer school on here that was about Prohibition, and the German lagers really seemed to be taking off in the late 1800s in the States. But then they used that to try to get people to think Prohibition was a good idea, because in World War I, we didn't like the Germans, and all these little German breweries were popping up, and they're like, oh, beer's bad because the Germans are making it. So that's interesting there. But were people in London or in the England area still drinking German lagers, or they just weren't drinking lagers at all, really?
Well, funny, off the top of my head, I can't give you all the exact names, but the names of the lagers that were imported from Germany and Belgium at that point, amazingly, are still pretty much the same beers that people drink here now.
Oh wow.
And
I mean,
still
like
hold
they're the
up.
Stellas and the names that you expect, the big names. They weirdly have remained the dominant beers. Um, so that's quite interesting. But people weren't drinking lager. It was ale. It was in London. It was porters. It was dark beers. You know, and further north it was sort of, you know, pale ales and nut brown ales and milds and bitters. It was like it was dark ales we were predominantly
Hmm.
drinking.
Huh.
And lager took a lot of time to sort of to become the most popular drink in this country, kind of like,
Hmm.
you know,
Right.
probably the 50s. But
I think that's an issue with the.
we're doing. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. No, I was
So
just gonna
the
say that's. Sorry, that's the fun of doing it over the internet. All I was gonna say was that's part of the issue with a lot of the craft breweries is they make ales to do the turnover quicker.
Yeah,
But go ahead.
it's more intensive, isn't it, to lager? I mean, it's, you know, the storage costs. We're having fun. We're researching the lager at the moment, going to recipe design to get it out for the summer next year. Well, and we found the original yeast, which
Oh.
is great.
Oh.
Yeah, we've got the original recipes, and we are trying, because our brewery doesn't have lager capabilities at the moment. So we have to go and test it elsewhere, which is really exciting, you know. So we'll hopefully have a really nice, crisp, authentic Allsopp's lager to release by April.
Ooh, wow. So
But it
how far are you guys planning to do your distribution then? Is it just going to kind of stay in like the UK into Europe, or are you trying to bring it to the States at all? Or what are you guys thinking distribution wise?
Well, if there's demand from your listeners, from your viewers, then the States obviously would be the place that I would like to sell the beer. We It's quite difficult at the moment selling into Europe from the UK because of the problems
Yeah.
with, borders at the moment. We are, but you know, we're 3 months old. There's a lot of work for distribution
Oh
to
yeah.
get it into the UK, and we're at the start of the journey. We have we've you know we've been picked up by good distributors in our old heartlands in the London area, and we are just, you know, picking off parts of the country at the moment in order to distribute to the UK. The
Hmm.
plan will be Europe and America, 100%. And I can't wait to come and get it into the States. It'd be really fun.
I can't wait
So
to.
those are the plans, but we you know we got to walk before we run.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
For sure.
And
So sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
no, I was just gonna ask how open are you guys over there? Do you have a tasting room or are you even allowed to have a tasting room right now?
We are
Or are you
now
just doing
allowed to have,
distribution?
no, everything is now open. There's a tap room where it's brewed, and you know, we are in pubs around the UK, in London specifically, and in the Burton area. We're expanding into sort of the home counties and Gloucestershire, the Cotswolds. There are pubs taking us up. So we've got there are pubs now. We are starting to sort of put them on our social media. So, you know, we put a pub in Leicester. So we're trying to show our readers and our followers where, you know, the growth, where they can start drinking Allsopp's
Hmm.
beer. But there are a few lovely pubs. In fact, next week my local at the end of my road has turned itself into an Allsopp's pub, which is a good and bad thing
Hey.
for me.
So you literally have a pub at the end of your man. That is. I wish. I mean, I guess I kind of do, but that is. You just walk down the street, get some beer, walk
I
home. Like
walk down the
it's nice.
street and there's a big Allsopp's. They painted Allsopp's with a big hand, and it says Allsopp's since 1730. Two new cask lines of fresh beer will be on tap. So
Man.
it's going to be very exciting. I mean, that's where you'll find me, I think.
Just if anybody's looking for me, just look up the road and
I'll,
I'm there.
I'll be there.
uh, what?
Now
Go ahead.
I was actually gonna ask because you had mentioned the logo, so I was like, "I wonder why he has a hand," and then you explained it, but can you tell us what that trademark symbol of the bright red hand, means for your brewery?
It's an interesting. That's another part of the interesting history. Funny enough, that red hand. So we were using a hand on to signify Allsopp. So before trademarks were kind of registered as a thing, trademarks in the UK were registered in 1876. But we had a hand, which is a grey hand, because in the 1700s, when the inns had fresh beer, because brewing was pretty decentralized, though, there were inns, like, we were brewing in the Blue Stoops Inn in Burton. There were no sort of large scale breweries really like there are now. And institutions, country estates, inns brewed their own beer. And so to signify that there was fresh beer in an inn, or a sort of bar in the town, or a coffee house, or whatever they were in towns, they'd stick a hand outside so the traveller would see that there was fresh beer within. And we use that as a signifier for Allsopp sells fresh beer. In 1876, when Bass came out with the first trademark, which was a red triangle, I think that my ancestors and many other brewers and companies were like, "Oh my God, that's so catchy, the red triangular Bass." So I think that Allsopp's then painted the hand red and registered that as a trademark. And so that's why we have the red hand. It's a derivation of "we have fresh beer," which is a nice symbol for a pub, for a brewery. Yeah.
That is pretty cool. I didn't
That is
even that
pretty yeah.
that's clever.
You know,
So
stop. It's like, stop, we've got fresh beer. I
you're
like to
like,
think of that.
stop here. No, go no further.
You
That was
got
the
me.
thing.
This is the beer you're
Yeah.
looking for.
Yes.
I guess one of my last questions. So everything kind of shut down in the 50s and went to sleep. What happened to all the old brewery and the equipment? What happened to all that? Do you have any like the old brewery equipment from some of the old breweries that used to run, or did that all kind of get lost and sold?
We have got a little. Well, I've got quite a lot of memorabilia here, which I'm going to actually put into the pub at the end of the road, and we've got lots of jugs, and my family have got bits and pieces. We haven't got any of the old brewing hardware for infrastructure. However, the building and the site is now on Molson Coors site in Burton. I think it's a 60-acre site. It's one of the largest breweries in the UK. And the Allsopp Brewery is part of it, along with Incoop and along with Bass. So all these incredible historic buildings now sit on the site. They invited me up 2 weeks ago to go and visit it, and I saw these lovely, huge industrial buildings, red brick with really, really smart. And they took me on the tour, and at the end of the tour, they said, "We'd like you to come into this warehouse." And it was a lovely Victorian iron girders, and it really, you could tell that it was once this very, very smart, bustling, important building. And in the middle was this 2-story, 120 barrel fermentation vessel lined with copper, with the rings going in it, and on the outside it was
Wow.
oak, and it had brass straps. And he said the guy that was this great Joe Stamper, who's one of the who does the brewery tours there and is one of the engineers at Molson Coors, said this was your 5 times seven times great grandfather. This was his fermentation vessel. Would you like it? I was like, yes, but it's as big as my house. Where am I? So I said yes. I'll have to work out where to put it next. I might just live in it. It's enormous, but it's so we're gonna have to close down the motorways and work out. I don't know how we're gonna get out. In fact, if they can, but they're very kindly, they're looking into it. But it would be great to have that back, and these beautiful copper taps that they used to run the Burton systems off. So it's still there. Some of the old stuff is still in Molson Coors, and they were very kind to show it to me. And I'm with the conversations carrying on with them in order to see what we can do with it. But yeah, it's a really interesting site and a great place to visit the old brewery. if you get a tour around it, it's amazing.
I think this just made one of my like I have to get out there and visits just from the discussion and the history alone. Like it sounds. Do you have like pictures of this anywhere like for people to see, or are you able to email pictures to Jay? Because I would love to see what these just look like.
I have got some really bad photographs on my telephone, but I'll ask them if they've got any better ones, and I get them sent across.
Yeah, I would love to
It's a
just
great
see.
thing.
And of
Yeah.
course, nothing
Yeah, it's
quite
great to know that
beats.
that's where it started off. That was
Yeah.
like where India Pale Ale was the Burton India Pale Ale was first brewed in that tank. Well, they say the first brew of India Pale
Wow.
Ale was actually in a teapot.
Ah,
I
yes.
saw
I
that
did
too.
I did saw that was in our notes actually. They did say that it was
How
first
English is
brewed
that?
there.
I didn't
Some
even think of
I
that.
didn't I know I had briefly thought it and I was like, no, that doesn't and then yeah, in a teapot of all the things. That's it's funny how it happens,
So
right?
the significance that I sort of when I first mentioned this, the significance of the date, it was that Samuel and his maltster, not brewer, strangely he was called a maltster, brewed that beer in a teapot in 1822. So next year is the 200th anniversary of the
Wow.
birth of Burton India Pale Ale. So we hope that's another thing. We hope to be releasing a sort of special edition, bottle conditioned. We'll recreate the original label and get absolutely as close as we possibly can do to that beer. It should be interesting.
Wow.
Are you gonna brew it in a teapot, like a giant teapot?
How they brewed in a teapot, and there's all these wonderful pictures of these smart men in sort of breeches and waistcoats in a teapot going, good beer. How do you? So again, it's part of these myths that have sort of bubbled along. That how do you make it in a teapot? I don't know.
Oh man, that is
Right. It could have been a joke that got out of control.
oh yeah.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
incredible. So I know it's nearly 2 a.m. for you over there. We sincerely appreciate it. You're welcome. If you want to hang out, we'll get some news and then hop off. Or if you want to go ahead and take off, go to bed. Either way, up to you. We'll wrap it up in the next 10 minutes here or so. So it's if you want to hang out, we can talk some more. Or
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm happy. I still got my bit of beer left, and
there we go.
I might hit the town now. Actually,
He's got a pub up the road. There's a pub up the road.
sadly it's closed now.
Oh,
They close at about midnight or something.
the audacity. Lauren, would you like to hit us with some beer news real quick, and then we'll go ahead and talk about some upcoming things and go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, I just have a couple little things, nothing too exciting. A Georgia brewery called Printer's Ale just released a Tom Brady themed New England IPA. Of course, it's in New England. It's called Tom Brady is a System Quarterback. And this is a quote from the founder and owner of the brewery. Everything he touches turns to gold. He's the one, end quote. Uh,
Boo.
Beginning of the second part, he operates at a level none of us know. He's Neo from the Matrix. He sees things, end quote. And on the can art, you can see like they got the Matrix background and everything. So some people who love him are loving it. People who hate him are loving it because, everybody sees through their own eyes as if they're making fun of him or praising him. My other piece is another bit of pop culture beer news. Belching Beaver in San Diego just released a Deftones collab mixed pack of beer. So if you can get your hands on that, it looks pretty good. It's got a nice variety of different styles. And it's interesting, all these bands collabing with all
Yeah.
these breweries. Like, I love seeing these bands that are getting into craft beer, even if it's just silly, slapping their logo on it. They're getting into it and they're
Yeah,
supporting
I
small
mean
business. Oh,
that,
I love
or
it.
even like the Tom Brady stuff. So obviously, I hated Tom Brady forever because I'm from Boston and I'm not a Patriots fan. Like I'm the only Bostonian that isn't a Patriots fan. So I hate Tom Brady, but Florida Tom, I like. I like Florida Tom now.
See, as a Dolphins fan, I hate the Patriots, so I don't really care that Tom Brady is on the Bucks because I'm not a Bucks
I
fan.
do because then he beat the Packers, but whatever. Yeah, I didn't really have any beer news. I was busy just reading, pouring over the history of Allsopp's beer, and man, the wife and I have always talked about getting back out there. I lived, in England briefly as a child, so obviously I wasn't out there hitting the town, but I hope to go back there and So before we do wrap up, what are we doing geeks wise here soon? What do we have coming up for some geeks?
So we just dropped our collab episode with Geek Exploration. We talked all sorts of things. We talked comic books. We talked to their comic book that's coming out. And then I yelled at them about Disney because they tried to say Disneyland was better than Disney World. So they got a little lecture there. And next week we got Ghostbusters coming out because
We
we're getting
do.
ready for the new movie. It drops this Friday. So tonight Matt and I are going to record some Ghostbusters fun facts and some recaps of the original movies to get you ready for the Paul Rudd Ghostbusters.
Yes, I'm pumped. I'm
And I
really
think
pumped,
that's
like
about it.
wicked stoked for that movie. God,
I know, it
I
looks
love the
amazing.
Ghostbusters. I just love
Uh,
the Ghostbusters.
but yeah, one thing before we ask the question, I guess we'll ask the question at the very end after he gives his final thoughts. I had to stop myself from reading your website because I wanted to learn something while I was talking to you. I've never gone so into a website and just wanted to keep it was like a book. I just wanted you should write a book about the brew. I mean, I've read a book about Sierra Nevada. I've read a book about Yingling. I would 100% read a book about this
Oh, I
brewery.
would too. That's what I was thinking,
Um,
like a book, or like I'm just picturing a movie where like somebody's running through the streets, you know, of wherever, just trying to get the recipe of the beer out. They meet the Prussian. Like as you were telling the story, I was just imagining it, and I'm like, man, it's incredible.
yeah, the only
Yeah,
beer scene I've done in Europe. No, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
right. So just saying, no, as we mentioned earlier, like the story arc is so bumpy and full of full of sort of silly kind of collapses and fortuitous
And teapots.
uh and teapots and fortuitous events and inventions that it's yeah, it would make such a good sort of film, I think. One day
I'm gonna
we'll
need
do that.
Michael Bay or whoever is out there to write a really.
Michael Bay.
I don't know. I just thought over the top because now I'm just picturing explosions while you're running the beer recipe up the streets of Germany. Explosion as only Hollywood could possibly do in their most ridiculous of ways. But we all know Daniel Day Lewis would have to play some sort of brewer because that dude is amazing as an actor. So.
Yeah,
But
that's great.
once again, seriously, do you have anything that you would like to close up with? Because before we ask the question and wrap up, because we sincerely appreciate your time. It has been such a wonderful adventure this entire episode.
Thanks, Matt. I know I sort of said it all. Then the just to mention that the history page of the allsops.com website has got kind of an interactive run through that we put sort of some of the images on there that we found, and we try and make it sort of as interesting as we possibly can do. So it's a nice place to find out. And if there's enough demand for Allsops beer, well then hopefully we'll be in America soon.
I hope so, man. I hope so. I know, like
Need
when
it at Epcot at least.
well, yeah, drink around the world.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a theme
great.
park in
Oh,
Orlando called Epcot. Yeah, you need Allsops in Epcot. I mean, you drink around the world there, get a beer in the UK at the pub.
cool, great.
That's the UK at Epcot.
Yeah, that's the only way we could. Well, Lauren, hit us with the question.
Question?
We won't have we won't have the winner exactly right now because we're gonna have to go back through the comments and things of that nature to obviously find it. Or if you have the answer, just feel free to DM us, message us wherever it is, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or whatever it may be. Message us with the answer, and the first person who does it, Jeremy has a nice little surprise for you.
We're all gonna trust that you don't Google or rewind.
Yeah, don't
Ha ha
Google.
ha. Okay. What is the name of the mineral that was found in the water that impacted the flavor of the beer that we mentioned at the beginning of the episode?
Whoa! Wait, we know this.
You better know.
I was here for that. So go ahead, answer that, and whether it's in a message or whatnot, and first person gets a nice little gift basket. Woohoo!
Yeah,
And
comment or message and spell it. If you don't know how it's spelled, just spell it phonetically. If
yeah,
you know it,
nobody's
we'll be
here.
able to tell.
We're not scholars. Let's be honest.
It's
None
not a
of us.
spelling bee.
It's not. Although, no, I'm just kidding. I have no idea. So, with
Well,
that
if
said,
multiple people guess it at the exact same time, we'll go with the one that's
we're gonna
spelled
go
right.
ahead and which one spelled it the most correctly. If you spelled it wrong, sucks to be you, brother. Anyways, Jamie, sincerely, thank you for your time as always. We sincerely appreciate it. And everybody, just make sure, go ahead, listen to this episode. Go ahead and find them, read their history for yourself. If you don't believe us, and if you don't believe the guy who's actually a part of this lineage and doing the brewery himself, by all means, go check out the website and find out just how crazy and exciting this is. And with that said, we will catch you all next week. Oh gosh, Thanksgiving's next week. Oh boy, I gotta go. I
Wow.
gotta go
Yeah, that
shop,
happened
and
quick.
I didn't realize it's Thanksgiving. I'm already like, I don't care about Thanksgiving. I'm just already thinking about like Christmas, and then my son's birthday's the 1st of December, so we're kind of focused on that. But I forgot Thanksgiving was next week. We're
Buy
already at
your
the end of
food
November.
now.
Yeah,
Last year I had to order a paint can of pumpkin on Amazon because there was no pumpkin puree at Target or Publix.
that we got like the whole
So,
food
yeah.
shortage, whatever's going on out there. So I'm probably gonna go shop on Sunday. To be honest with you, I'm gonna be out of town the next couple days. So
Ugh,
oh well,
good luck
it'll
to
be what
you.
it be. We'll eat food at some point, even if it's just sandwiches. And speaking
As long as they're
of,
turkey sandwiches.
quick plug as we do go out. If you are looking to figure out how to make your turkey, go to our YouTube page, because I did a cooking episode on how to brine and smoke a turkey. So go check that out on our YouTube page. And shout out to Hot Barons. They're the ones who, the brine and all that good stuff. So without further ado, thanks everybody, and we will catch you next time. Cheers.